Ladies and gentlemen, at the start of this year, we announced that Comic Class would be changing its format. No longer would we be focusing on single issues. Nay, now we would be focusing on larger issues. Issues that affect the entire comic book landscape. However, every now and again, there's still a single issue. One single, brilliant issue that forces us to stop and stare at and say, oh my God, did they actually just do that? An issue that is so bold, and so crazy, and so brilliant, and so stupid if you actually stop and think about it. And it takes all these elements and mashes them into the span of 20 some odd pages. And if that is not the definition of art, then I don't know what is. So today, on Comic Class, we are going to take a look at Flash number 761. But first, because the YouTube algorithm demands it, I'm going to ramble on about Rebirth for a while, so that way you guys will be forced to watch the video for a longer period of time. Don't be mad at me, that's how this whole channel works, okay? Folks, let's talk about Rebirth. A few years ago, DC wasn't doing well, and I'm not even talking about sales-wise or their internal affairs. No, that's a whole other bag of trouble to shift through. No, I mean their universe was going down a dark path. Their books had been reset with the New 52, and with this reboot, we ended up losing a lot of what people loved about this universe. And I don't just mean things like specific characters no longer existed, although that is worth bringing up. No, I meant a universe that was known for family, love, and legacy was now lacking, well, all of that. Almost every legacy character disappeared, and the ones that remained had little to no connection to these older heroes. The only superhero families that still existed were the Bat family, and, well, that's pretty much it. And even the Bat family had an event just a year into Rebirth designed to break up their connections to each other, and every major couple in the DC universe broke up and had their marriages retconned out of existence. But it went further than that. The changes weren't just specific story elements and connections missing. These heroes were now more aggressive, more serious. It felt like the universe was no longer being made by someone who thought these characters were cool, but by someone who was desperate to prove they were cool. Oh, you think Superman is lame? Well, what if I told you that he, tried to burn Lex Luthor's face off? Yeah, pretty cool now, right? And you think Wonder Woman is a joke? Well, little did you know that, she's the god of war. Yeah, that's the ticket. And you think their costumes are goofy? Well, now they're all made of metal and covered with lines because my sense of fashion stopped 2 decades ago. Now who's goofy? So yes, the DC universe was kind of lost in the miasma of 1990s grim, edgy seriousness. But then Rebirth came around. A book that was dedicated to bringing back everything that we had been missing from the old DC universe. The book was critically praised, sold a ton, and launched a new wave of books that saw huge success for DC. And all of this was centered around the return of Wally West, the original Kid Flash who had grown up and taken over for his mentor Barry Allen and actually went on to be the Flash for over 2 decades before being wiped from continuity. Fans loved seeing their Flash return, and this led into the Joshua Williamson Flash run, which was one of the best Flash books in decades. And to put a cherry on top of all this, it was revealed that the changes to the DC universe, the great grim darkening of 2011, came from an evil, all-powerful outside force trying to shove his own philosophy into the world. Not exactly the most subtle metaphor, but hey, I'll take it. However, despite this giant shift towards the positive, this upswing didn't last. Yes, Wally was back, but much like everyone else in the world, the next 4 years were not kind to him. He was torn apart by the disappearance of his family, broke off his connections with Barry Allen, despite that connection being the very thing that brought him back to life, started to be tormented by visions of the alternate timelines, and all of it reached a peak with Heroes in Crisis, a book that was meant to touch on the very serious topic of the emotional damage being a hero can take and why it was important to seek help, a story that was meant to remind people suffering that they weren't alone and that it was okay to reach out. However, the series handled this delicate issue with the tact of a man cleaning up their apartment by setting off a bag of fireworks, as it started the book off by killing multiple beloved characters, revealed it was all done by Wally West himself because he was overwhelmed by all the psychological trauma he had gone through, causing his power to act up in a way that never had before, and killed half a dozen heroes, and then he tried to kill himself to hide what he had done. We've already talked on this show before about how this was actually a very destructive look at mental health issues, and how everyone was written out of character, and all the other issues related to this book, so I'm not going to go into that now. Instead, I'll just say, can you imagine if someone read Rebirth, saw Wally come back, and then decided, cool, I'll return to this in a few years and see how it's going, and they just heard that description I gave right now? Just picture a big Wally West fan hearing that's what happened to him within 2 years after he returned. Damn, even for the Flash, that character assassination was quick. Now, after these events, Wally went from being the hope of the DC Universe to being sent to jail, where he was then picked up by a big cosmic entity who gave him godlike powers so that he could travel through the timeline. And if you want to know how badly Wally was treated over the past few years, just think about the fact that some fans are applauding this move. I have seen multiple Wally West fans saying that this is a huge glow up for Wally, and I think that says everything you need to know about this situation. No guys, it's cool. Wally isn't a murderer who can't live with his own guilt. No, he's just going to exist outside of time and space, and we only see him during big cosmic crossover events. It's all good. Within the span of 3 years, Wally West went from being the character everyone was begging DC to return to the timeline, to a character people were excited to see removed from reality. I don't have anything else to add to that aside from, holy crap. Cut to last week with the release of Flash number 761, in the midst of a storyline called Finish Line, which saw the whole Flash family facing off with the Reverse Flash and his gang of villains. Now, the Reverse Flash uses the negative Speed Force, which grants him all kinds of crazy powers, including the ability to ignore time paradoxes, so even if he changes the timeline, he's unaffected. In other words, he's the ultimate retcon machine. And that machine was in overdrive in this issue, where he revealed that he had another ability. The ability to speak at a frequency that makes his voice hypnotic, and this allows him to run through the Speed Force to different times and subconsciously control people. And in this issue, it was revealed that he had used his power to tell Wally to cover up the deaths of the other heroes when his powers exploded, and that his friends wouldn't believe it was an accident, which drove Wally down an even darker path, leading him to attempt a very complicated time travel suicide. Goddamn, every time I have to say those words out loud, I still can't believe it actually happened. But it didn't stop there. Over the past few years in the Flash book, we watched as Barry Allen doubted his life with Iris. He turned away from his fellow speedsters. Wally and Barry fought each other, and their bond that was strong enough to pull Wally back into reality fell apart. And over in the Teen Titans book, Robin started a secret prison where he sent supervillains without a trial and kept them locked away, and Kid Flash was surprisingly on board with this. Now, if you're a longtime fan of the Flash family, you might think, all that seems really out of character, and you'd be right. And you know who else thought this? Joshua Williamson, who said that the Reverse Flash was behind all of this. He had gone through time hypnotizing all of them to act this way. Now, on the one hand, I won't lie, this is kind of a crazy and honestly even lazy retcon to just have the Reverse Flash swoop in and say, "It was me, Barry. I was behind all of it. Your mother's death, the creation of some of your greatest enemies, the breaking up of your family."
Remember when you were making out with your first girlfriend and It was me, Barry.
Yeah, it's way too easy. But on the other hand, who cares? Because yes, all those developments were bad and they went against these characters, and in some cases, actually destroyed these characters. So a creator coming in, not even like a decade later, no, literally just a year later, when all the people working on these books and making these decisions were still there at DC. They were still his co-workers. And saying, no, I'm undoing all that is wild to me. This is one of the biggest boss moves from a writer I have ever seen in a comic. And what's crazy is that many of the events he highlighted here happened in his own book. He wrote them. However, this gets to the big issue to spotlight in this episode. You can tell from Joshua Williamson's run on The Flash that he loves these characters. He loves them for who they are. He loves the Flash family and their legacy and their supporting characters. They're important to him. However, we know for a fact there's some people working at DC who don't feel the same way, who have problems with the Flash, especially with Wally West. And these people, for many, many years now, have been in higher positions of power at DC. Positions that make the final decision around these characters. Now, I won't go into too many details about this because, as I have said many times, the comic book world is pretty secretive. Very rarely do we get looks behind the scenes and learn how these creators really feel. So it would be incredibly irresponsible of me to make assumptions. However, you can look at certain patterns and what bits of info we do get through interviews, and it becomes pretty clear that the people in charge of DC over the past several years have wanted to take it in a darker direction and wanted to break up the development that these characters spent years making. And hey, nothing wrong with trying to change things up, with trying to give books a fresh coat of paint and revitalize them for a new generation. But the constant need over the past few years for DC to break up their relationships, to remove the heart and hope from their universe, that's not constructive. Especially when it's clear that the people working on the books actually love that about these characters. They love the families, they love the hope and the relationships, they love the love. And over the past several years, it feels like they have kept making excuses for the decisions made by the people at the top. Like they have to keep turning to the audience and saying, we know, but we have to do this. And that's why today's video is titled, Let the Flash Be the Flash. Yes, you can change these characters up, and you should adapt them to changing time periods. And it's absolutely true that every character out there who has existed for 40, 50, 60 years will have multiple sides to them, so you can't put them in any one specific box. But you have to realize that even with years of varying stories and different takes on the characters, there's something here at these characters' cores that people love, that means something to their fans. And with The Flash, it's his family, it's his friends, it's his legacy, it's the hope. But those messages of hope, it's not exactly what the people running DC have wanted to push forward. And it's not just in The Flash, it's across their entire board. I repeat, the Teen Titans were running a secret prison. Remember what I said about Wally West fans going from 2016 to 2019? Imagine Teen Titan fans going from this to this.
In Emerald City, we got rules. We tell you when to sleep, when to eat, when to piss. There is no yelling, no fighting.
Again, not saying you shouldn't try anything new with these characters, not saying that you shouldn't explore the various sides of these characters, and I'm especially not saying you shouldn't have darker stories with these characters where everything goes wrong for them. All good story arcs need the all is lost moment. But when 2 years after bringing back a character people had been clamoring for, you have him go down such a twisted path that a year later, another writer has to come in here and go, it was an evil, all-powerful force that made him do that. Yeah, maybe you're trying to jam square pegs into round holes. Not to mention that character came back because for the past 5 years, characters had been acting so dark that he had to return to reveal, it was an evil, all-powerful force that made them do that. Oh my god, wasn't that exactly what we did with Hal Jordan and Parallax? Anywho, I don't want to keep staying up here and droning on all day about DC's obsession with tearing down their own house,
But I do want to get to the matter of why. Why is it that people working at DC constantly want to tear these characters apart, even when it means that they're essentially dismantling the things that fans have come to know and love about these characters? Well, there's really no way to know for sure, but it could be a matter of personal taste. We do know that a lot of people who are working at DC, or at least were working at DC up until the unfortunate reshuffling that happened a few weeks ago, came up during the late 80s and early 90s, back when everything was grim and dark and edgy, so it could be that's just their personal taste, but there's really no way to know that. However, something that we do know, because it was recently confirmed in an interview with DC's former co-publisher Dan DiDio, is that Dan DiDio might have had some opinions on this matter. You see, for years, there was this running joke that Dan DiDio hated Dick Grayson and Wally West, and these rumors went all around the comic book sphere, and in this interview, Dan DiDio said that it was mostly just a bit. It was indeed a joke that people were making about him, so he decided to play into that joke. Oh boy, I cannot tell you how funny it is when the guy who has the power to decide whether or not your favorite character continues to exist continuously says how much he doesn't like them. Woo! Oh man, that is a knee slapper. And then when those characters continuously die off, or we later find out that they almost died off in giant events, only to have someone stop DiDio from doing it at the last second. Oh man, hearing those stories over and over and over again, it just makes you love reading comics and in no way makes you jaded to this entire medium. Whoo! Good times. What was I talking about again? Oh, right. Someone asked him about his problems with Dick Grayson and Wally West, and he said,
"With Dick Grayson, and this is the same with Wally, people love them because they aged with them, so they feel this affinity that these guys have grown up with them. The problem is that much like Batman and Superman, now Dick Grayson and Wally West have to stop aging, because they're going to pass their mentors. Dick Grayson's going to be older than Bruce Wayne at some point, because Bruce doesn't age, and Dick Grayson's going to be the older guy if he does keep growing up. Therefore, those things constantly force the reboots that we're faced with, because it creates these logjams and these multiple interpretations of characters all sharing the same name." Earlier in that same interview, DiDio also said that he had additional problems with Wally West because his origin story was dependent on Barry Allen. You couldn't have Wally unless he followed Barry, so he couldn't be his own character. Meaning, if we had a Flash movie or TV show, you'd have to start with Barry. Now, for the time being, let's ignore the fact that there was a Justice League show for years with Wally as Flash and zero mention of Barry, and let's also go ahead and ignore the fact that Wally became the Flash back in the 80s, and that means that there are people out there in their 30s who never once could possibly have experienced Barry Allen as the Flash, meaning they didn't grow up with Wally West, they just liked Wally as the Flash. And let's focus on his concern with Wally being that he's a legacy character, and on this concern that these legacy characters force these characters to age. I'll be honest with you, I can actually understand this concern. I mean, the fear that having legacy characters creates too much to explain about the past does mean you're concerned this could make your universe too complex and scare people off. And if characters keep aging and growing, then that means that you will have to worry about the future of these characters. What happens when they get too old and the next generation has to take over? Does that mean that one day we have a world where Clark Kent isn't Superman, where Bruce Wayne isn't Batman? It is a legitimate concern for the person running this business to have. Which brings me to a line from this Reverse Flash retcon that really stood out to me. There is a moment where Reverse Flash is talking about how he used his power to manipulate the Flash family, and he says, "It stopped all of you from learning how to move forward." This line really stood out to me because, yes, the rest of the retcon, it did feel like the writer was turning to the audience and saying, "I don't like how these characters have been written, I'm going to address it," but this one line felt like something much larger to me. It felt like the writer was turning to the audience and addressing something much bigger than just these heroes being written out of character or in a way that we disagree with. It felt like there was a message behind this line. Like it was essentially saying, these characters are not allowed to develop and progress. They're not allowed to grow. We have to stop them. And with these comments from DiDio, it feels like there really is some kind of a mandate on these characters that if they grow too much, then we have to come in here and break it up and reset it. This pattern has been going on with comics for a long time. It was the motivation behind the New 52. They didn't just reboot the universe, but as I said, all the married couples broke up because if Superman is already married to Lois Lane, if Barry is with Iris, if Green Arrow and Black Canary are together, then how will we be able to tease audiences with will they, won't they scenarios for 20 years? And it happens all the time with specific characters. Just look at Damian Wayne. That character goes on a huge arc, grows so much with every single writer that works on him. Then the next writer comes on board and he's back to being a snarky egomaniac because how on earth are we going to show him going through that entire arc all over again if we don't reset him with every new writer? And this isn't even a recent thing. Remember when Roy Harper got his life together, was a successful loving single father, joined the Justice League? Then they ripped his arm off, killed his daughter, and had him get addicted to heroin all over again because, hey, remember that? That's the way you remember him, right? That's how he was 30 years ago, so let's do it again. He must always be that thing from that one issue that you remember.
And just to clarify, this is not just a DC thing. No. I've just been focusing on DC because the Flash book brought it up this week, but the issue of comic companies not wanting to let their characters grow and progress is a huge topic that needs to be addressed. In fact, in all honesty, it should really be its own show, and Marvel is just as guilty of that as DC. In fact, let's be real, the moment that I brought up the issue of a retcon that was designed to prevent characters from growing and progressing, you all went to the exact same one story in your mind.
One More Day. The story where Joe Quesada, the editor-in-chief of Marvel at the time, forced the writers to make a story where Spider-Man made a deal with the devil that ended up erasing his marriage from continuity. Joe Quesada wanted this to happen because he said that he felt the marriage of Spider-Man and Mary Jane was a mistake because once he's married, then what's next? Does he have a kid? Does the kid grow up? Does this mean Spider-Man gets older? Does this mean that one day he would eventually quit? Again, I understand this concern when you run a company that revolves around these characters. I understand why when you have to stare down this choice, it will be intimidating. And this is the same reason why we see these characters regress or why we see relationships constantly splitting apart. So we don't have to see them grow and eventually ask the question, what happens next? But I may be speaking for myself on this one. However, I'm pretty sure most comic book fans, when given the choice, hey, we have to age these characters up and move on to the next generation, or we have to regress them again through the power of a deus ex machina, quite literally in some cases, most readers will probably choose the former. So how about, instead of us having to worry about how accessible legacy characters are, which if the trade sales of certain legacy characters, as well as 25 years of Wally West Flash fans are to be believed, is really freaking accessible, and instead of worrying about what storylines that grow and progress characters will do to these characters in the future, how about we just let the Flash be the Flash? How about we just let these characters embrace what we love about them and continue to let that grow? And if that means that one day new characters become the Flash and Barry has to retire or go off into the Speed Force all over again, then so be it. Because if the alternative is that we have to keep coming up with excuses to, quote, stop them from learning how to move forward, then that's not progression. That's not growth. And a tale that doesn't have growth or progression is not a story. That's an Ouroboros. Just one big loop that's eating itself and, well, I know comic book companies are worried about bringing in new readers, but it's kind of hard to keep your old readers around when they have to keep constantly saying, oh God, not again.
But there you go, everyone. That was our episode of Comic Class this week. And as always, I'm going to go off script a little bit here at the end and just give you my post-game analysis, my final 2 cents. And typically during this time, I like to leave you guys with a little bit of hope. And I know that over the past couple episodes, I haven't really had any of that to give, but I actually do think there is some hope here. As I mentioned, a lot of the people who were preventing these characters from progressing, they're no longer with DC, and it's very sad how that came about, but there are some new people in charge over there right now, and yes, I did bring up the fact that it is a little bit concerning that all the new people in charge of DC right now pretty much came from the world outside of comics. That is a little bit questionable. However, in the weeks since they got appointed, I have been listening to them talk about these characters, and it does sound like they like the idea of them progressing. It does sound like they like the idea of focusing on a new generation of characters, so that actually sounds pretty cool. That sounds like all the things we were talking about, so I've actually kind of got my fingers crossed on this one. I'm actually a little bit hopeful right now, so I hope that I was able to, at the very end here, provide you guys with some hope as well. Also, over the past couple weeks, I have been spotlighting some indie books out there, some stuff that is not from Marvel and DC. And this week, I'm actually going to focus on something that is from a Marvel and DC writer, but it's his own original creation. It is 7 Secrets from Tom Taylor. If you are a big Marvel or DC fan, you're probably also a big Tom Taylor fan. He is one of the most talented writers working out there today. And yet, somehow he never lasts over at Marvel or DC. Like, he always gets put on a book, and then he's there for like a year. And then he goes over and works on another book. And it's typically always great. Whatever he's working on is always amazing and always sells well. He just kind of always goes from one thing to the next. And I always kind of wonder, like, okay, well, when are you going to kind of like get on your own thing? I know that he's had his own original property, The Deep, going on for a while, but that one kind of passed me by. But this is a brand new indie book from him. I always like to come in here and focus on a Marvel or DC writer's own personal creative projects outside of those companies, because I always like to encourage them going off and doing their own thing. This is once again Tom Taylor going and doing his own thing. And yeah, the first issue of it is out right now, and I gotta say, really enjoying it. It is very different from a lot of things I've seen from Tom Taylor, but it still has rich, diverse characters that I've come to expect from him, and it still really knows how to set up major elements that you know are going to play off later on down the story. So yeah, I was kind of hooked after issue number 1. And I'm gonna really go into more details. I want you guys to discover this on your own. But yeah, 7 Secrets by Tom Taylor. Thank you guys for tuning in. And as always, leave a comment down below, hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, share us around the internet, blah, 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 all those other things. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Come back next time. Bye.